Hello and welcome to Creative Photo Folk, your photography playground. In this tutorial, we'll be experimenting with a glass ball and some corrugated cardboard to see what fun photos we can create. As you no doubt know, because of the spherical shape and density of glass balls, they create upside down reflections of whatever's around them. And so we're going to take advantage of this by using some corrugated card with interesting lines that will contrast nicely with the glass ball's round shape. Now, for comparison's sake, I did test this technique with some glitter card as well. And while it created some nice looking bokeh, I just don't think it looked nearly as interesting as the corrugated card. So it really is key for this technique. Except where on earth do you find it? Well, luckily, while I was researching this technique, I received a package with some corrugated card inside. So you could just try putting a wish out to the universe. Otherwise, your best bet is to visit storage or packaging companies. It tends to come in large rolls, so they might be kind enough to cut a bit off for you. Or you can buy small sheets in a range of interesting colors from Amazon or stationery stores, but these just weren't big enough to bend around my particular sized glass ball. When choosing a piece to work with, you want to try to find one that isn't damaged in any way, as tears and bends will be noticeable. Next, you're obviously going to need a glass ball. So you can buy specialty lens balls specifically for photography, or I just use a regular old 80mm crystal ball that also tells the future. So make sure to give this a wipe down and then place this on a stable flat surface to prevent it from rolling. Although the corrugated card does do a pretty good job of keeping it in place, thankfully. You're going to want to shoot this in a dark room because the problem with glass balls is that they tend to refract everything in the near vicinity. So before getting too deep into your shoot, make sure to take a couple of test shots just to check that nothing unwanted is being refracted in the ball. I set everything up on a table positioned near a plain wall so I could use this as a backdrop, but also I left enough of a gap between the wall and the table for me to be able to get behind with my torch. Next, we're going to need some lighting. So I have seen this done with a couple of studio lights, but I appreciate that not everyone has this kind of equipment. So instead, I decided to use a couple of household torches, and to give them some color, I used small colored gels. I'll link to a similar product in the description below. You'll need to put your camera on a tripod, not only because we'll be using slower shutter speeds, but also to give you the freedom to move around and shine your torch into your setup. Using your camera's 2-second timer will give you the time to get into position. Now, I think you can probably use most general lenses for this. I started with my trusty 24-70 and then did some experiments with a 16 to 35mm, which I'll show you later on. Now, my settings varied a bit based on the color of gel I was using, but I mostly used f14 for some decent depth, ISO 100, and a shutter speed between 1 to 5 seconds. We'll be looking at various setups today, but for all of them, I made sure to get focus on the glass ball, usually the surface closest to me, and then lock this in with manual or back button focus so it wouldn't change until I moved things around. Now, the first setup I shot was this teardrop shape. So I folded the two ends of the card, making sure the corrugated side was facing inwards, and then used a couple of household pegs to clip them together. When you put the ball inside this shape, it kind of resembles an eye, which is pretty cool. Now, for the lighting, I had two small LED torches, and because they are a directional source of light, they overexpose quickly. So I chose to use the one that was less bright. Then I just curved whatever colored gel I'd chosen around the sides and held it in place with my fingers. The lighting is the toughest part of this technique, and the thing you'll want to experiment with the most, because unfortunately, it's pretty much always going to leave some hot spots on your ball. So rather than shining the torch directly into my setup from behind, because this created too much light, I tried to shine it more from below and to the sides. Now, you need to hold this fairly still during your exposure because moving it creates light trails. And if you position it so it lands in the middle of the ball where nothing is refracting, that's going to make it easier to edit out later because it's tough to remove it when it falls over the card. But I don't mind it in this particular setup because it looks like the catch light in an eye. Now, you'll want to try front and back lighting, different light positions, and also a variety of gel colors. Next, I tried rolling the card into a tight circle and popping the ball in the middle. This was a little bit harder to get good shots from, only because the edges of the card don't match up easily, but I still think they look really interesting. Then I tried this half curl technique, where I used a small box to prop up one side. For this, I mostly kept my torch to the side, moving it around until I saw a refraction in the ball and a shadow shape that I liked. And again, the hotspot was problematic, so I tried using a diffuser in front of the light, but it really didn't make any difference. If you move this box closer or further away from the ball, you can change the angle of the bend in the card for some different looks. For this one, I also tried holding a piece of red card behind and shining the torch onto that rather than pointing it directly at the ball, which made the center colorful instead of black. This also created less intense hotspots, so I tried it out again for my next setup, but it didn't look any good on the back of my camera, so I ditched the whole idea. But actually, it seems to have turned out all right. So bouncing your torchlight is definitely something that you should try. Unfortunately, something had snuck onto the table by this point that was creating a refraction I didn't notice. So keep an eye out for that. Next, I put the card in a half curl parallel to the camera and shone torches from both sides with different colored gels to create this look. Then I played around with an LED light bulb I have that has a star shape in the middle because I thought it would be a fun light source. But it's always been difficult to photograph because the white star shape is too bright compared to the blue color. For this version, I brought in my laptop to use as the background light source instead of using a torch and loaded up some free pattern images from unsplash.com. To see how to set this up, check out this video. Unfortunately, these are a bit out of focus because I was using a different camera from usual, which gave me the impression I had focus when I didn't. But the different colors and refractions look really effective. And then finally, for this version, I switched to my 16 to 35 millimeter, so I was able to get closer and really enhance the lines in the card, which I think worked super well. To get the colors, I actually tried something I have never tried before. So I held 3 different colored gels in front of my lens, which I moved around during the exposure to create some rainbow colors. And then for the light, I just used my bare torch shining into the tube from the front. So that is it for the photo shoot. But now let's head over to post to clean up a few issues.
So over in Photoshop, and you can do a few of the things that we're about to do in Lightroom. It's just that Photoshop gives finer controls, so I just don't waste my time usually in Lightroom and head straight to Photoshop if I'm doing these kinds of changes. So the first thing I'm going to show you how to do is just get rid of any distractions, because no doubt you will have some. So first thing we'll do is just add a brand new layer with this little plus icon down the bottom. And there's various tools you can work with here, so I may just go back and forth between a few. But the first I will try is if you go to your little band-aid icon here, and I'm going to use the spot healing brush, which is the first one in the list. We will zoom in, and then flicking back to that tool, I can just make it about the size of the things that I want to remove and then paint over them. And Photoshop should do a relatively good job of cloning those things away. So you may want to get really specific. I'm not going to spend too much time. I think that is probably enough for this image. For this, we can try this and see what happens. Oh, look, worked first go. So I won't show you another tool in this case. So now that we have fixed those things up, we can just take a look. Looking better already. And the next thing I want to show you how to do is to change the color. So really easy, we'll just add a hue saturation adjustment layer from our little half pie icon. And then all you need to do is play with the hue. And you can get all sorts of interesting colors if you've got some good color in the background. And then you can also play with the light. So this time I added a levels adjustment layer, and then you can just play with the brightness, midtones, and shadows just to see if you can get something you like, really just down to taste. So that's our first little example. So let's now jump into the next one. Now for this version, there is a bit more to clean up and a lot more over the actual texture, so it's a bit harder. We may not get a good solution here, but I just want to show you the difficulty in it so you know to try and avoid getting light spots in these areas if you can. So again, we'll add a brand new layer. We will zoom in using Z to zoom in. There's a lot to clean up here, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. We will use that spot healing brush tool again just to do some of the stuff in the black. So the black is really easy. So that's not going to take a lot of your time. You probably want to take a bit more time than I am though. But let's take a look at some areas like this. So let's try, yeah, that worked okay. Now let's see what it does over here though. So, okay, it's working quite well today. Maybe that one not so much. If you don't like what it does, you can just press undo. Now that one didn't work. See, it hasn't made it align. It's made it a bit diagonal. So we'll maybe work on that bit. Kind of looks okay. This tool is actually working better than the ones that I tried previously. Now I'm not liking that. So these are possibly the areas we want to play with a little more. So I'm going to swap now to my clone stamp tool. The clone stamp tool, the shortcut is S. It's this little guy here that looks like a rubber stamp. And to use it, we make it the size of the area we want to paint over usually. And then what I can do is press Alt or Option over an area that I want to sample from. So we might actually, if I sample from here, it's going to be probably too dark. If I sample from somewhere with the same lightness, that might be a better option. Yeah. And for this section, we might do something similar. But you can kind of tell it's off. And that's the problem with texture that is sort of formulaic, because if you kind of do anything that looks a bit off, it's really obvious. So you can see that this is going to be a little bit more experimental, a little bit more time consuming. And some of them have been quite difficult and in some cases impossible to fix. So see, it's really obvious, I think, when you do this clone work. Just try and get your light spots in places that are dark, so they're really easy to remove, or even on the side, they're kind of difficult to get rid of there, but they still look okay, like they give it a bit of dimension. So that's my advice with that one. And then finally, just for something a little bit different, what I did is grabbed this image here and I flipped it. So I just went to, in Lightroom, I went to Photo, rotate, I think left. And I kind of like how it's a little bit different, like you're not too sure now what you're looking at. But what I then did is I took it into Photoshop and I created this with it. I'll show you how to do that in Photoshop. So we'll go Photo, edit in Adobe Photoshop. And I had to zoom out. So to do that, I pressed Control or Command minus. Then I press C with my crop tool. Up here where it says 1:1 square, or may say something different for you, I'm going to make it original ratio. And then I'm just going to pull it out a bit, maybe like that. Then all you would do is make a copy of your original layer with Control or Command J. Then you'll go Edit, Transform, Flip Horizontal. Then with the Move tool, shortcut V, I'll grab that and move it into position. Then you could highlight both over here in your layer stack and press Control or Command J again. And then you could go with them both highlighted, Edit, Transform, Flip Vertical, and then pull them up like that. So then with my crop tool, C, I'll just crop that back into position, and then you can do any other changes that you want to make.
I think the results of this are really interesting, but I was a little bit disappointed by the light spots. So I'd probably experiment more with the lighting in future. What do you think of it? Make sure to let me know in the comments. And if you do try this yourself, come share your results in my Facebook group that you'll find linked in the description below. Otherwise, I shall see you again next week with another creative tutorial. Bye.